Hello, is everybody there? Hello. I just wanted to say.
Hello, Cristina. Goran is here. Please wait a couple of seconds.
Okay.
Only a couple of seconds. Some people will join us. Some 2 seconds.
That's great. Thank you. I just wanted to check the equipment, but I can wait. So no problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Dai, non sarete il problema. Dear friends, we will start with a new speaker today. We are so happy actually to have honor to welcome Cristina Blanco Lopez, professor. She is a member of the Global Young Academy. She is a member of different international organizations. And we are very lucky that she will speak about Kant's pursuit of peace and the building of European integration processes, blueprints for an alternative future. Somehow we are living in new paradigm in the geopolitics, and probably we are looking for some alternative future. Cristina, floor is yours.
Very kind presentation. I hope you're hearing me well. Otherwise, just let me know. I will raise the volume. And I'm very honored to be here today with you talking about one of the most fundamental issues for our common future, which is sustainable peace. And I'm a historian, and my personal motto is looking back into the past, in order to address the challenges of the present. So that's what I will try to do today. And without further ado, I would like to share my screen. Let's see if that works. So here we go. Just give me a minute. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me select the presentation mode. Does it move for you? Can you see the different slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That's great. So thank you so much. And first of all, I would like to say that I feel especially honored to be able to speak in this forum. I think we are all very committed persons to these alternative futures and these ideas of peace. Now more than ever, it's like really what we need to focus on. So what I would like to do today is to look back into the past, go as far back as Kant and his ideas about perpetual peace and how they can even be helpful and illuminating and groundbreaking even today in the present. But at the same time, I would also like to, that's something way before the European integration process, which is my area of specialization. Then I will also talk about a very important figure at the inception, at the creation of this European integration idea, and then I will address the challenges of the present and how they can all give us the ingredients to achieve this sustainable peace we care so much about. So just to start with, I would also like to mention some of the main insights about the current project I'm working on, which is dedicated to the freedom to move, human mobility rights as a fundamental right to have rights, and how that freedom to move is essential to have global peace. So whenever I worked in this field and conducting interviews, I went to historical archives to look for origins about this idea about human beings being able and allowed to move freely around the world. I found a notion that I found really interesting, which is this idea of space as a vehicle, which for me is really at the foundations of European integration in a hopeful way. So I kept on finding that in historical archives, space as a vehicle, and that's why I brought this image, this painting by Brazilian Canadian artist Rob Gonçalves. And what you can see in the image is the idea of an infrastructure that becomes a vehicle of possibility. So that was a foundational idea, foundational hope for European integration, and following the idea of a solidarity model, an enabling model, not a limiting one, something that has conditions and potentialities that carries a vision in the making. So it would correspond with this whole notion of transforming stumbling blocked rocks into stepping stones and transforming conflict into cooperation. That would be the whole idea of space in itself becoming this vehicle of possibility. So that has something to do with our current context, our very challenging and difficult current context. And I will try to be optimistic today. And that's something I would love to talk more about in the debate and the Q&A. The idea of this age of disruption we are living currently. But at the same time, I think there's an empowering factor, which is the ductility of this age of disruption. It's tactile, it's something we can change. And we very often forget the power we have through ideas, through language, through perceptions, through dialogue, most of all, which is the basis of democracy as well. So I brought this quotation by Harry Melville, who said that we cannot live only for ourselves. 1,000 fibers connects us with our fellow human, our fellow men, and among those fibers, as sympathetic threads, our actions run as causes and they come back to us as effects. And I think this is something we should never forget when we talk about peace, how our actions run as causes and they come back as effects.
Dr. Lopez, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but your presentation doesn't seem to be moving, and
okay. I think I know which is the problem. So let me start again.
Okay, now it's moving. Now it's changed.
So
now we don't see it anymore. Now it's still you.
I should be able to do it like this. There's a trick, and I hope it's working. Okay. So now you see the second slide, right?
The age of disruption slide.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So no, please.
Interruption.
No. Please interrupt me at any time. I'm very happy you told me because I could go on and on and I couldn't realize. So I'm very happy about that. So that would be the idea. A key ingredient of peace is the realization that our actions run as causes and come back as effects. And that empowering feeling could be helpful in this age of disruption, reminding us of its ductility. We have the power to realize that, and we can also only do that in dialogue and in conversation. So I'm very hopeful about this event, about the idea that it can trigger a realization about the need to talk more among us all on these issues. So going on, can you see the new slide now? Hello?
Yes, it's good. It's moving.
It's good. Okay. Just to check. Now I know. Well, I'm running it. That is working properly. Okay. So talking about this idea of the ductility of an age of disruption, I think it's very important to ask, and I do that very often as a very passionate historian, to ask, what have we forgotten? Because many times by looking back into the past, we realize we have the factors, the mechanism of analysis, the main ideas, the pillars, the arguments to address the challenges of the present. And sometimes we have forgotten things. Other times they have been neglected, they have been hidden. And that's why it's really helpful to dig into those cumulative sediments of the past and bring them back to the present. So what have we forgotten about peace and the fundamentals of peace and how to make peace sustainable? And at the same time, how did we talk about that in the past? Which was the language we use, the discourse we use? If it was compelling at some point, could it be compelling also in the present? And most importantly, this is an identity question that is based on this idea. What have we lost of whom we wish to become? Whenever we have a project, a vision, a proposal, we launch it because we want to become someone. It's not about just obtaining things, attaining things. It's not about getting, it's about becoming, it's about being. Who do you want to be? So I think this is the first question. And this question was addressed in a very intense way at the inception of the European integration process, but also through decades and through the whole of the 20th century and the 21st century, who do we want to become? And I think this is the starting point to determine the pathways to implement peace, sustainable peace. Who do you want to become? So now starting with this faraway past of exploring again Kant and this idea of perpetual peace and how it had an influence in European integration and how it could be helpful for the present as well. I would like to start by talking about Kantian ideas of an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. And of course, Kant talk about this idea because Europe has been known by its wars among all possible countries and regions and communities for centuries and centuries. And I remember one of the interviews I was conducting with one of the chief negotiators for the eastward enlargement of the European Union in 2004. And he said, like, there's no unity of Europe because Europe has never been united. It has been always the theater of war. So how can we transform that? And at that time, but also before, in earlier periods of the European integration process, there was this exploration and reappropriation of Kantian ideas. So talking about this ever closer union among the peoples of Europe who are so different, so diverse, but who think that just by cooperating, they could overcome violence, conflict, and mutual destruction. So Kant, in his writings, he talked about a third way between a world of many states and a world under the coordination of one single state, a superstate. And in his view, that could be achieved by a union of peoples, a union of a diversity of peoples. And he linked that notion to the concept of perpetual peace, which is also connected to what he called a cosmopolitan hope. And I think this is something we have lost sight of, the idea of having together this cosmopolitan hope, not just national constructions or community constructions or regional ones, but a common, a universal cosmopolitan hope. That could be centered on creating the basic conditions of trust first, then the aspiration to have some kind of mutual understanding and respect in international relations. So this idea of trust, mutual understanding, and respect would be the basis for peaceful international relations, already his ideas in the 18th century. And at the same time, Kant mentioned a principle of making the freedom of each consistent with the freedom of all within a civic state. And of course, this is never straightforward. There are many gray areas, but that can only happen through dialogue. And that's why Kant was recovered many times by different scholars interested in developing this idea of a dialogued democracy, a dialogued integration. So at the same time, he was thinking in terms of the impossibility and the lack of meanings of moving towards this worldwide cosmopolitan condition because of some hindrances, some barriers. And if we think about that in the present, we can also conceptualize this impossibility of this local and global dichotomy in which neighbors are always peripheries and they are never part of our core. So when Kant talked about the worldwide cosmopolitan condition, he was breaking through the eyes of this core versus periphery mindset. It was a worldwide cosmopolitan condition of universal rights, fundamental freedom and rights for all. And the key issue that would arise, and this is something that happens with European integration, but also with comparative regional integration discussions, when you talk about constructions like ASEAN or the African Union or Mercosur, different regional integration institutions. This comes back again and again. This idea of the perpetual peace evokes what Kant called at that time the cosmopolitan, and now we could call it the global human horizon. And that has to do with the vision I was talking about at the beginning, this idea of identity. Who do you want to become? Which is your horizon? Which is the vision in the making that you want to implement and to enact? That is the common global human horizon that is at the basis of a possible, hopefully, perpetual peace. So then, after going through these original ideas that were recovered at different points during the European integration process by policymakers and scholars and so on, I would like to talk about a figure, a personality I'm very attached to, which is Salvatore De Mandaria. He was a very interesting contributor to the creation of the European integration process. But before that, after the end of the First World War, he was at the Society of Nations, so the League of Nations. And it's a very interesting case because he was a scientist. And I know that in this conference, there's really an interest and a commitment to discover more about how scholarly communities and scientific communities can contribute to world peace. So Salvatore De Mandaria, he was an engineer, and he had many different facets. He was a diplomat, an ambassador, he was a civil engineer, he was a journalist, a poet, a playwright, a novelist, a defender of the rights of different peoples in exile through a very long timeline. And as part of this activism, he always talked about this connection between science and diplomacy. And when he was in the League of Nations, he became the chief of disarmament because he thought, okay, I'm an engineer. I could build a weapon, but I can also disassemble it. I can disassemble weapons. I can reverse engineer destruction into cooperation. And that's what he tried to do in the League of Nations in the 1920s. So he really, in my mind, having this past in the League of Nations and then this very prominent trace in the European integration process, you can, for instance, consult his archives at the Collège d'Europe in Bruges. It reminds me about this quotation by DeWitt Jones, who said that it's not trespassing to go beyond your own boundaries, because when you try to build peace, it's not just about respecting the existing boundaries, the conventional, the inherited mindsets. You break them, you go beyond your own boundaries, and you try to make the impossible attainable. That was very present in his life. So he had this conceptual legacy and political initiatives of linked also to his experience in exile during the Spanish Civil War. He went in exile to the United Kingdom. He was teaching at the University of Oxford. He was in London. Then he was in Switzerland. And he was part of the European movement, where he created this section called Captive Nations. So he would help intellectuals in exile coming from authoritarian regimes in Southern Europe, totalitarian regimes in Eastern Europe, living in exile and trying to create a democratic future for those communities. So he created this captive nations section within the European movement. And as you can see, he was very active in all these fronts. And he was one of the main personalities recovering this Kantian ideal of perpetual peace. And that's why I'm bringing that into the mix today, into our conversation. And he talked about the reinvention of our common textures of possibility. When we talk about peace, we talk about textures, special, we could call it today, vibes. So these textures of possibility, something he said we need to recover in order to set the ground to implement peace. And there was something very curious when he was recovering these Kantian ideas about perpetual peace. He was especially working as an activist in exile, promoting peace and cooperation at European level beyond all the difficulties by many different kinds, as I was saying, authoritarian, totalitarian regimes at that time in Europe during the Cold War. So he also usually responded with poetry when the other activists in other points of view were asking him, how can we implement this sustainable peace? What are these ideas about a common European home and European integration you are talking about with other personalities at that time? So he responded with this very striking poem called Forbidden Places, trying to explain what is happening in the world as he was seeing that at that moment. And I will read it very briefly because I think it's also very timely and very current. So he said, cold faces barred access to the forbidden places. North, hate. South, war. East, challenge. And west, scorn. Ancestor and time were thin the traces, and then they drowned that dreaming dust of strife. They lost faith in their own life and cursed it in their hearts. He was relating this poem to his experience of the First World War, and he was constantly asking all the time, are trench scars closed in Europe? So his answer was these four forbidden places, which are just coordinates of the whole wall. And he found it very difficult to find a way forward because all these forbidden places are just the wall itself. And then he came with the idea, at the same time he was writing this famous book, the blowing up of the Parthenon, because the breaking up of peace, of a peaceful order, and the difficulties and the wars and the conflicts coming with the Cold War, it was something that he called the blowing up of the Parthenon. So at that time, he was responding to, through letters that you can find in the archives, to different activists in exile as well. And he created this idea of the home of man, that maybe Europe or maybe the world can be the home of man, the home of all humans, a place for peace. And he said, the earth was meant to be your paradise. We often forget that. And there at the gates of time, in history's plan, the war nightmare will see arise and made the world the home of man. So he was also recovering these perpetual peace ideas in a proactive way and linking, he was a scientist, he was an engineer, but really a poet and totally passionate about art. So he was linking the art and science and diplomacy and activism and peace activist dimension in his work that I found so interesting. And when digging deeper into the European integration ideas, he gave a metaphor about that. And he recovered the science notions for that principle. He said, imagine somebody who draws a mathematical formula in a garden, and it's based on the square root of -1, which does not or cannot exist, but the dynamo upon which this formula is based works. And he explained the same. We can say the same about European integration, and we can say the same about a sustainable peace. The formula cannot and does not exist, but it works if we make it work. It was just about willingness. And that brings us to the very difficult challenges of our present. Is something I'm currently studying in this project I have about human mobility rights as a fundamental rights to have rights. So, and what I find again and again is also this dichotomy between liberty and security that brings us back to Benjamin Franklin saying that those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And this translates also in our present by this imbalance, this asymmetry, liberty and security. As we can observe a growing tension between a democratic mindset based theoretically on the protection, guarantee, and implementation of fundamental freedoms and rights on the one hand, and the erosion of the quality of democracy under a worldview growingly dominated by overarching notions of security, surveillance, and control. So, what I find very interesting about this dichotomy is also the fact that we tend to forget that peace is not just the presence of security and safety and the absence of conflict, but it also has an ingredient of community building. It's something which goes much further than that. So I think that by increasing this ingredient of community building, solidarity, and so on in peace, we can fight back this dichotomy and this imbalance that we are immersed in. So also, if we have a look at more current issues like interregional dialogue, as I was mentioning before, comparative regional integration in our world, we see experiences that try to bridge global and local level experiences of all these challenges and achievements sometimes. And they are mainly developed from a political and socio-economic perspective, but they also have reverberations we tend to forget. And this is where we can have a role as scholars committed to these issues. We have research, we have the arts, and so on. They also have this kind of dimension, this interregional dialogue dimension. So we would say that integration holds this parallel potential for what we could call a re-enlightenment reboot somehow, going back to this foundational idea of perpetual peace. And peace would be the key objective in this re-enlightenment reboot, and also the willingness to share and discover knowledge beyond boundaries. And locally, not just global or local, but locally a structured commitment to make it possible, so at different levels. And just to finish, I would like to read this poem by Paul Astor to finish on a hopeful note, as I was saying at the beginning, stating that I've been trying to fit everything in, trying to get to the end before it's too late. But I see how badly I've deceived myself. The end is only imaginary, a destination you invent to keep yourself going. A point comes when you realize you will never get there. You stop, but that does not mean that you have come to an end. And in that, paradoxically, I see a hope. So thank you so much for your attention.
Professor Cio Lopez, thank you so much for your fascinating and, if I may say, poetic contribution to our conference, which was a real refreshment. We have a little time for discussion. 2 questions already waiting, so...
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you if I understood correctly what you were saying is that the European integration is in fact the way to achieve this kind of perpetual peace idea, at least on the European continent. Am I right in understanding your presentation that way?
Shall I respond or shall I wait for the second question? What do you prefer?
You can respond right away.
Okay. So, well, I wouldn't state that. I think that what I was trying to show is that there was a direct recovery of Kantian ideas in theorizing the scope and the hopes of what European integration could become. But honestly, I'm very critical of what has been or not achieved in that process, because you see that many times is something that we hear in public relations about this idea of 60 years of peace, and but it depends on where are you looking at. I mean, today I had the privilege of talking to you in Croatian. So I'm talking to persons who live and work in the Balkans, who know the story, the history of this region very well. And I think that Europe is larger than the European Union. And I don't think that the 60 years of peace really encompass the whole of the continent. So the initial hope and the theoretical scope, we cannot say has been achieved. What we could mainly recognize is that at least in different points in time, there was an attempt to transform this idea of a European integration process into a viable vehicle to sustain peace. And that's the difference. I do not think it has been actually achieved because Europe is larger than the European Union and peace was not everywhere. And we can also see many different paradoxes. We can see, and this is something that worries me a lot. When I study about these theoretical principles of solidarity, the solidarity principle, when you study about peace as a foundational element of European integration, or another principle like socioeconomic cohesion. Of course, these are theoretical principles, they are pillars, no? So you have these norms and values. But then you look at the reality, and the reality does not very much or always or many times reflect these foundational values. And what worries me is the co-option, is how in our present, many policymakers at all levels, they are using these principles and these theoretical mindsets and frameworks to justify their policies. Well, we are doing the exact opposite. So this co-option of principles to do the exact opposite is really dangerous, and it's something I mentioned in the presentation, which constitutes an erosion of the quality of democracy, because we're not just talking about the presence or the absence of democracy, but we're also talking about the quality of democracy itself, and which are the benchmarks that we as societies want to settle and establish as points of no return for our democracies. So that would be the nuance I would like to introduce. And it's something you can see in many contemporary events. We can talk about conflict and war in the continent, but we can also talk about, for instance, refugee camps in Europe, or discrimination and second-class status, and so many different levels of discrimination within the European Union that show that fundamental freedoms and rights are not even that present inside. And that also creates this idea of double standards. It has also something to do with external policy, foreign policy of the European Union, but even with development aid. The European Union is said to be the main donor of development aid all around the world, and it established this so-called democracy clause that all those countries who respect fundamental freedoms and fundamental human rights can receive development aid. But then when you look inside the European Union, it's like, are these rights always respected even within? So you always have this issue of double standards and more aspirations than actual realizations. And that's normal. I mean, we are not perfect, but sometimes we are too far away from the principles. And that's what we call the level of quality of democracy. And I think we should focus more on that very point. Thank you. I hope it responded to your question.
Hi. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. And I don't know if you've been here yesterday, but I spent the time I was given to criticizing the current idea of perpetual peace. So my comment's gonna be a little bit critical, but just from a scientific point of view. And being very short, the Kant's idea of perpetual peace is based on three assumptions: that humans are given a transcendental capacity of reason, which is being disproven by neuroscience today, and the world is a rational order, which is also being disproven by mainstream scientific debate. There's no rational, systematic order to the natural world. And language is a descriptive instrument, which is also, it was proven by mainstream cognitive linguistics. And given that the theoretical assumptions of Kant's philosophy are not old anymore, and they're not valid in vis-a-vis the scientific debate, the scientific current debate, like all that is left in advocating these ideas is to make moral call for action that results into a faith-based argument. And if you that might be reasonable, like if you read the work of if we read the work of Niklas Luhmann, we know that faith is a meaning suppressive mechanism to create common commitment to social interactive strategies. But Kant's idea exists longer than communism. And if we look at empirically how they perform poorly. And as much as we have achieved some results, and I don't want to diminish the results we achieved, if we took empirical proof of how these things work, it's time to go beyond this. We cannot be reactionary and trying to advocate infinitely for these things when we have very clear empirical proof that this is not as performative as we believed. It can be inspiring, but ultimately we have to face the facts. That's all I wanted to say about this.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I couldn't join you yesterday. I would have really be very interested in your presentation, and thank you for these critical points, because that is the way we advance in conversation together, as we were mentioning before. So I totally agree with you that faith is meaning suppressive is something we should avoid. And at the same time, I think that, and I agree with the fact that it's not a rational, and we have these assumptions that have been proven wrong through scientific studies. But I think it's also about choices. So you were saying it's something inspiring, it's not empirical, it's not based on facts. And maybe the answer to that is not just trying to recover Kant's ideas, but moving beyond them. So in that way, we cannot just be aggregating, but being groundbreaking. And what you're proposing is being groundbreaking. And I think this is the way to go, is to say, this is something that was inspiring at some point in history and created some moving forward towards something that we consider beneficial for our society, which is peace, and makes them sustainable in time, which is peace. But we need to move forward. So now the question is, how do we define this new peace, and how do we define the new principles, the new mechanism of analysis, the new how we provide a channel between these empirical facts that have been studied and detected by scientists, by the scholarly community. How do we connect that with society? And here I think we find an interesting paradox, because of course we do that through language. We do that through oral textual communication. We use language, discourse, and you were saying language is descriptive, of course, discourse is manipulative, of course, but it's also the challenge of science diplomacy. We have the empirical facts. How do you create an outreach of that? How do you create a communication with the wider world, with different societies, interconnected societies? So I think that in our present, this communicative challenge is very important. And for that, we need to decide, as I was saying at the beginning, who do we want to be, who do we want to become. And as you were proposing, we don't want to be what we were. We don't want to believe, especially believe and have faith in the faith that came before. We want to create something new based on facts. And that's perfectly fine. But my feeling, at least in my eyes, the idea at the core is how to guarantee something that becomes more and more important at all levels, also at the level of research and academia, is something that is becoming more present. The whole notion of well-being. How can we provide well-being for societies, and peace could be a key ingredient of that. We can use a new language, new ideas, we can disprove previous facts, but I think it's important that we care about this well-being and peace being a main factor of that, and that we communicate that from science to society. So I don't know, maybe a good fruit of this conference would not just be to make sure that something has been disproven by scholarly debate, but also sit down and write something like a manifesto, okay, and let's go beyond Kantian ideas. Let's go, and then something good about research to realize that you're wrong and to move forward. Just write a manifesto of this conference, moving beyond perpetual peace. So which are the new compelling factors to guarantee a sustainable peace in our present, which is so different from the past? And I would agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina, for your lecture, which invites us to look back into history, to see beyond in terms of future peace. Thank you also for your very short discussion as well. Dear Cristina, thank you once again. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now we are ready to the next speaker. Okay, Cristina, please don't share with us your presentation. It is great. Well, okay, thank you, thank you. We are very happy to welcome Mariana Vela, PhD candidate of the University of Rijeka. She is one of the leading consultants on EU projects in Croatia with over 20 years of experience in project preparation, project management, EU funding, strategic planning, and public procuration. She has more than 500 projects of 5 billion euro value. She is a founder and board president at Adult Education Institute, Učilište EU Projekti, and a lecturer at Edward Bernays University College. Ariana will talk today about facilitating peace through EU funds, programs, projects, and possibilities. Ariana, welcome. Floor is yours, Ariana.
Thank you. I hope you hear me well, and I hope you see the presentation well. As I can see, you can see it on the screen. So far, so good. I'm very happy to be with you today, even though I had to be in hybrid mode because I got a little sick this morning. So I apologize for not being able to be with you in person. I will try to make it up to you during the lecture. And of course, should you have any questions at the end, you're welcome to ask anything, and I hope I will be able to help you. So when Goran invited me to talk at the conference, he told me, can you just identify sources of funding for projects that would facilitate peace? And that's what I did. And when I was initially considering the issue, I actually, even though, as you said it, I have a lot of experience when it comes to EU funding and public procurement, I was not as focused on this subject matter. And I was quite surprised to see that in this financial perspective, namely 21-27, there are pretty substantial funding opportunities, and I hope I will just present some of them, and then if you will have any questions, we can discuss it in detail. So this is basically the roadmap. I will give you a few information about what we're doing as a company and as an adult education institute. I will present the programs that support projects having to deal with peace issues. I will tell you what types of projects can be applied to certain funding sources, and maybe give you a few tips on how to proceed with your projects or with your project ideas. So when it comes to us, as you already said, we are a limited liability company that owns an adult education institution, primarily dealing with preparation and implementation and project management of projects that are financed either from EU funding or different sources. And we pretty much did over 500 projects, and the number is rapidly growing due to the fact that Croatia has a huge allocation in this financial perspective, which is also enlarged by the funds from Recovery and Resilience Funds. We just successfully opened Pelješac Bridge, which is probably which is the most and the biggest infrastructure project in Croatia, but we're not only focused on infrastructure, we're focused on some soft projects as well. And maybe the last information is that we became expert consultants of McKinsey & Company for Funding EU. I've started developing also a scientific career. As you said it, I enrolled into a PhD at the University of Rijeka, started teaching at different faculties, and hopefully this career will also, I will also develop the career even more and even further. Not just in the consultancy area. These are some of the projects that we did, but as I already said, more than 500 different types of projects have been prepared and implemented by our company. Now, when it comes to programs or funding sources, there are two main categories: the centralized ones and decentralized ones. The biggest difference is that the centralized ones are the ones that are being managed by European Commission or Directorate Generals. This is where mostly project consortiums apply. There is competition between all EU member states, but also third countries, which is also an opportunity for the countries that are in the pre-accession period, or for any other third countries to participate. Decentralized ones are usually the ones that are managed by managing authorities in different member states, and the chances for third countries exist, but are not as big as within the centralized programs. So these are the ones that we have to divide. And what happens on the level of European Union is basically European Union, when they plan a financial perspective, when they do and identify their strategic objectives, they pretty much settle or pretty much adopt a number of strategic objectives, or as you can see on this slide, thematic pillars. So we have 6. I will not read through the slide because I think that you can see them yourself. Of course, not all the thematic pillars can cover the issues that have to deal with projects that facilitate or foster peace. Some of them can do it in a more thorough way. Some of them can do it less, but basically all the programs and all the funding sources are in a way situated somewhere in between or under the thematic pillars that you can see here. Now, when it comes to these thematic pillars, you can see that there are different options that are available, and they're available, which is a good thing, for all kinds of organizations. This is a very important thing to know, especially when it comes to centralized programs, such as the first one that you can see here, which is Horizon Europe. Most types and all types of organizations, and it doesn't matter whether they come from the private or from the public sector, are eligible for funding, which is a good thing, because when it comes to decentralized funding, usually there are some obstacles and there are some limits. Within the centralized, we don't have that problem. So within the next 2 slides, I have taken out the pillars that are actually that have to do with projects that we're interested at, and I've identified the funds or the funding sources that could be available for different types of projects. So under the first pillar, which is single market innovation in digital, there is a new program which is called Horizon Europe, a predecessor of Horizon 2020 or FP7. This is basically the biggest research and development program in European Union. It develops in terms of what can be financed, it develops in terms of the procedures, it develops in terms of eligibility. So pretty much here, what you can fund are small scale or large scale consortium projects that deal with certain research about anything that has to do with the subject matter that we're talking about today. The only problem with Horizon projects is that they're very competitive. So you need to have consortium that is already experienced. Like, for example, we have a few universities and we have professors that are participating on this conference. It is very important for you to see whether your organization already had experience in Horizon Europe, which is a good thing, whether you have an organization in a consortium that had experience with project management of such projects. And then preparation of projects does not start when the call is actually published, but even before documents which are called work programs are being published. Work programs are basically documents that present what can be financed under a certain topic within Horizon Europe. And already during the preparation of work programs, project consortiums are being set. They are usually published for a period of 2 years. So if you would like to get prepared for calls like that, you would need to find a pillar or a thematic scope, which is something which deals or which covers the subject matter that you're interested in. Go into the work program, find an available call, see when the call is going to be published, and actually start preparing the consortium and the project. When it comes to the second pillar, which is cohesion and values, it covers a large number of funds and pretty much covers a part of European Structural and Investment Fund, which is ESF Plus, European Social Fund Plus, which is a new fund that comprises of different funds that were actually connected in this programming period, but also funds such as Erasmus Plus, such as EU Solidarity Corps, Justice Program, and the new one, which is Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values. So within each of those programs, there are different types of calls and different types of thematic pillars that can also secure the funding. Most of them, except for the ESF and EU civil protection mechanisms, also have work programs or some kind of a program booklet where you can see what the topics that can be financed are. And if you find it interesting, or if you find something like this interesting, then definitely the next step would be to take a look at what is available, to take a look at the work programs, or take a look at the annual call, and then just go into it. When it comes to the fourth pillar, which is migration and border management, there is an asylum, migration and integration fund. Within the security and defense, there are two funds. And usually with these funds, we usually only have member states and their public bodies as beneficiaries, but sometimes the rules are changed, and sometimes from one perspective to another, eligibility rules can also be changed. So it's very important to check whether your organization is also eligible for funding under these funds. And of course, within the sixth pillar, which is neighborhood and the world, there are also a few funds that are available, funding sources is on this slide. So it's not, at this point, it might not look as if it's much, but under each of these funds, under each of these funding sources, there are numerous of topics that can be financed and numerous calls that can be open on monthly basis, on annual basis. So pretty much it's very important for you to see through what is the theme what is the problem that you would like to solve, and then basically find an available funding source for your project or for your problem. Now, when it comes to types of projects, it is very important to understand what type of project can be applied when it comes to this theme. What types of projects can be applied to different programs or to different calls? They pretty much depend, as I already said, on identified problems. And you will see on the later slides that basically each project starts in the way that you identify certain problems that you want to solve, or as we consultants say it, challenges that you would like to tackle, because a problem is not a good word. It usually sounds very negative, even though throughout the methodology, this is actually, problems are something that we solve with projects. But as we consultants like to say it, challenges or issues that need to be tackled. This is a much friendlier word. Anyways, maybe 3 types of projects are something that can be available. R&D projects, as I already said, Horizon Europe is one of the main funding sources for them. And maybe at this point, I think that you all understand what R&D projects are, because most of you come, and all of you basically come and have an academic background, so you already know what I'm talking about. And as I said, these are mostly collaborative projects. Most of the applicants or beneficiaries or consortium members, project partners, are coming from the scientific sector, from the R&D sector, but these funding sources do not prevent different types of organizations, such as NGOs, such as private companies, such as different types of public bodies, even local self-governments, from participating. We also have different types of dissemination projects that serve, that are here to improve the awareness, that serve for increasing the knowledge about the subject matter, for sharing the information. And most of the funds that you have seen on the previous slides can be treated as dissemination projects. And also there is something that we call vertical projects. This is something that I've been talking about when I mentioned problems/challenges. So there is a specific problem that you want to tackle on local or national level, even maybe a multinational level, and you want to solve it on the level of the project, and you're doing it vertically. This is what we call vertical logic inner project. So these are pretty much 3 types of projects that can be applied. Of course, some combinations can be done as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be only R&D, because within the R&D or dissemination projects or vertical projects, you still have to have dissemination and visibility activities. You still have to have project management activities, etc., etc. So it pretty much depends on what are the problems or challenges that you identify, that you want to solve, that you want to tackle. And of course, it pretty much depends on the applicant's capacity to create a stable network, to create a good consortium that can not only be eligible for applying to a certain call, but also have the capability and have the capacities to implement the project and to make it sustainable in the future. Now, what would be some further steps in identifying or in preparing your projects? I do not have much information on how many projects that you already participated in, but even though peace as a subject matter maybe looks like something that can obtain funding, maybe the funding is as easy to obtain funding for such projects, but I think it's not impossible. Having seen the sources of funding, it is a pretty big number of funds that the projects can be applied to. So the next steps definitely have to be identifying project ideas. This is something that you can do together. This is something that you can do within your own organization. Pretty much what is a challenge that you want to tackle, what type of project do you want to have, who would you like to participate in the project, would you like to invite some other organizations? Would you like to apply it as an international consortium project, or would you like to apply it as a sole beneficiary? So a good project idea is always the first step. A second step would be to find a strong leading beneficiary that already has experience in EU-funded projects, because then, first of all, it's something that is actually evaluated during the evaluation procedure, whether the lead beneficiary has and what type of experience in EU funding they have. That's the first thing. And the second thing, a good, strong lead beneficiary can help you, especially if it's a consortium project, to do the preparation efficiently, to not waste time during the implementation, and to prepare a solid project application that has a good chance of successfully securing the funding. Now, after doing this, you need to identify the exact source of funding. When I say the exact source of funding, then I mean you need to identify the fund, and you need to identify the call, and then wait for the call to open, or if the call is already open, then you have to start preparing. Forming a strong project consortium is something that I already talked about. It's not about the number, it's about the purpose. Who can help me achieve what I want? Who can help me tackle the challenges that I identified? Who has the capabilities? Who has the different types of like material or human or other capacities to help me? So don't make a mistake that project consortiums usually do. They put in a large number of participants, which makes projects difficult to manage when they reach the implementation phase. Try to work with organizations that do want to spend time on working within those projects. So the biggest mistake that you can make is putting a lot of partners into the consortium and then pretty much having 50% of partners doing nothing. This will damage, or this will pretty much put all the funding in danger, because you will not be able to implement the activities, and you will not be able to reach the milestones or deliverables that you have identified within your projects. Now, also, one of the steps that you need to undertake is going through work programs that I've already talked about, or going through operational programs. These are documents that are operational programs, or OPs are documents, strategic documents that are being developed within European structural and investment funds as documents that present what can be financed through the ESIF and under which conditions. So if you want to see where you can fit in with your project, this is something that you definitely have to do, and start preparing in time. It's a very important thing. People usually come to us 2 weeks or 1 week before the deadline. And of course, we're professionals, so we can do whatever you want. We can create a miracle in 1 week, but it's never good, because if you don't have enough time, you cannot discuss the roles, you cannot discuss the budget. You pretty much put all the effort into one project partner, usually lead beneficiary. The other partners don't have enough time to give information or to give feedback on the prepared project, and that can create problems when it comes to implementation. So if you follow these steps, the success is something that I think is something that will definitely happen. But with EU funds, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, let's say, structured work, a lot of effort to get the first grant. Afterwards, it's much easier when you get, especially when it comes to centralized funding such as Horizon. It takes a lot of time and effort to get the first Horizon project, but when you're in that club, as I like to say it, when you get into the club, then you're a member of a club, and it gets much easier. So this is pretty much the basic structure of funding, and this is the basic information about the funding that's available. Should you have any questions, I'll be available now, but you can also email me, and you can ask me additional questions like that. Thank you.
Mrs. Vela, thank you very much for your extremely informative presentation, and I think right on time, because it seems to me that we're sort of, in this conference, we're sort of drifting from pure theory to, in the next 2 days, starting to discuss possibilities of putting this theory into practical projects. So your presentation was absolutely spot on, and thank you once again for it.
Thank you
We have
for having me.
just a little bit of time for discussion, and I already have a question here.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your presentation, the practical aspect of it, and both the hope in your voice about one of the more challenging parts of the field. Wondering if you could talk a little bit more about private-public partnerships and opportunities for funding that you see there. And in addition, one thing that I'm really passionate about and to including in our conversation is the opportunity for social entrepreneurism, so that we're not constantly going back to the till for funding, and that those who we're working with have an ability to move forward without us.
Okay, should I answer it right now?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, so when it comes to public-private partnerships, it's an issue. It's an issue in Croatia, and it's an issue on the level of European Union, because as you know, in order to obtain or in order to kind of contract the public-private partnership, there are certain legally prescribed procedures. As far as Croatia is concerned, there is funding and there are subsidy programs that support public-private partnership. The issue, the topic of peace can also be one where you can, for example, build different type of infrastructure through such a union. However, Croatia does have a public-private partnership act, but there has been 0 projects that have been implemented under public-private partnership, which was done according to law. I had an opportunity to work with my colleague from the faculty of Rijeka, Damir Juricic, a long time ago while this act was actually being prepared and adopted by Croatian government and Croatian parliament. And what we had to do is pretty much blend the procedure which was prescribed by the law with the EU funding procedure. So if you wanted to do a public-private partnership, you would first have to undergo the procedure, which is, it's similar to public procurement procedure, and then you have to enroll into the EU funding procedure. So it's not impossible, but it's difficult, and what's more important, it's time consuming. And if, for example, you have a call which opens in 3 months or half a year, it's much more difficult to do it according to law. Now, when it comes to public-private partnerships, which are being prepared as project consortiums, you can select whoever you want. You can even avoid the legal procedure, but it's not the public-private partnership which is actually regulated by national laws or European legislation. So you can always form a project consortium with different types of partners, but then the regulation of ownership and everything else can become a question. For example, if you want to build something in a certain local self-government, for example, in a certain city, and you come as a private partner or you come as academic partner, if you don't undergo the procedure according to regulation, there will always be question, who is going to own the infrastructure at the end of project, who is going to invest into what is the eligibility of such a consortium, what are the funding rates of such consortium, because we know the subsidy rules are different for public partners and for private partners. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered in this procedure. As I said, not impossible, but not as easy as everybody thinks. When it comes to social entrepreneurs, Croatia does have an OP, which is an operational program on human resources within the European structural and investment funds that does subsidize projects that are being projects of social enterprises. There are also projects on the level of European Union. You can do certain research projects under Horizon, but also under different types of funding as well. So it's a thing that has been recognized in Croatia and European Union, and if you have a project like that, it can be funded. I don't expect many problems. The only problem when it comes to social entrepreneurship is finding the right call. It's not like they are opening every month. So you could have, like on the national level in Croatia, you can have it every 2 years, every 3 years, or something like that, a few times within a financial perspective. So this is the only obstacle for funding of such projects. But on the level of EU, you can accompany it with different type of funding, Interreg projects, and stuff like that.
Thank you. If we, I see our friend Boško, if someone from the Zoom want to ask something, we can have actually one additional question. If you don't, then it's fine because we are over the time already. Oh yes, okay, Boško, you're with us, please.
Thank you very much. Just one very short question. Ariana, congratulations, not only for your great presentation, but all your work last year, so just go for it. Well, my question is short, very hypothetical, but who knows? If you are Croatian Minister of Regional Development and EU funds, what will be your priority in the first year of mandate after 10 years of Croatian membership in Union? Thank you.
It's not an easy question, but thank you. If I were a minister, the first thing that I would do within this situation, which is pretty specific, and you know all about it, identifying the project pipeline that we have under 1420 perspective to see what we can finish, what we cannot, identifying the project pipeline for the perspective 21-27 and for Recovery and Resilience Fund to see what we will have in the future, and then pretty much see what we can actually complete, especially when it comes to infrastructure projects, take out everything from the pipeline that cannot be implemented, make room for other projects, especially in the private sector, because the private sector uses the funds really efficiently. And then certain changes in the system, managing system, not big ones because it's too late. If we were to change it now, we would lose another 2 or 3 years of financial perspective. So now only specific work on specific project pipelines can be done in order to save the funding. Not many changes in terms of the system and in terms of the regulation when it comes to EU funds can be done, and education of the whole managing system on public procurement, on implementation procedures, and maybe what's also very important, a shift in their mindset, not to protect the system, but to protect the beneficiaries and to try to give their best to use as much money as we can. And you know that one minister has his or her hands tied without the reform of the public administration and without the reform of different of wages and whatever stimulations, introducing stimulations and stuff like that, it is impossible to make public servants to actually make them more efficient than they are today. So I always say it, you cannot expect a public administration which is not efficient to suddenly become efficient because somebody gave them new funding. It's very difficult. So maybe these would be the things that I would do if I had the chance.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna vote for you. Thank you.
I'm not gonna be a candidate ever, so. But thank you, Bosch.
Hey, say it, Ariana. We are waiting for you. So, Ariana, lecture and great discussion on the facilitating peace through EU funds, programs, projects, and possibilities. Especially thank you for these answers and these discussions. Especially this last with Boško, because we are all interested actually to see you, maybe not in the politics, but in very high position in our society, because we really need you, and we need the people of your experience at the key roles in our society. So thank you once again. Thank you, Ariana.
Thank you.
And now I'm so pity that you are not with us, because we are going to have lunch, and it's really pity you are not with us, because as you know all, we